The town of Millinocket, tucked deep in Maine's snowy forests, had seen its share of hard winters, but no one was prepared for the chill that swept through hearts on the afternoon 8-year-old Ethan Miller disappeared. It began innocently. Ethan had been playing in the yard, bundled in his red parka, chasing his golden retriever Daisy. His laughter echoed against the pines as Daisy darted toward the tree line, tail wagging, nose pressed into the snow. Ethan, adventurous and stubborn, followed without thinking. Laura Miller, his mother, had been in the kitchen, the smell of chicken soup filling the house. She glanced at the clock, expecting Ethan and Daisy to rush back through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold. Minutes stretched into half an hour. Her unease sharpened into fear. "Michael," she called to her husband, her voice already trembling. "He hasn't come back." Michael Miller stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line. Snowflakes swirled in the fading light, and the forest loomed dark and endless. "Ethan!" he shouted, his voice carrying into the cold. Only the wind answered. Neighbors soon gathered, pulled by the urgency in Laura's cries. Sophie, Ethan's 12-year-old sister, stood near the porch, her hands clenched into fists. "He wouldn't just keep walking," she whispered, but her eyes betrayed doubt. The first hour was chaos. Flashlights bobbed through the trees. Voices called Ethan's name until hoarse, Daisy's barks echoing faintly before fading into silence. Tracks in the snow led into the woods, but twisted in circles before vanishing under fresh flurries. Sheriff Daniels arrived quickly, his presence steady, despite the storm brewing in everyone's hearts. He was a man who had lived his whole life in Maine, his lined face a testament to winters endured, but his eyes held worry. "It's dropping below 15 tonight," he said grimly. "We don't have time to waste." Laura clutched her scarf tighter, her breath ragged. "He's only 8, he doesn't even have gloves on." "We'll find him," the sheriff assured, though his tone carried the weight of experience. He knew how cruel the woods could be in winter, how fast the snow erased signs of life. Search parties were organized, men on snowmobiles, others on foot with lanterns. The church opened its doors to prepare hot coffee and sandwiches for volunteers. The whole town became a hive of anxious determination. In the forest, the night grew darker, the trees pressing close. The cold was merciless, sinking into bones, numbing fingers, stealing voices from the air. Every broken branch, every distant snap, made the searchers pause, straining to listen. Back at the Miller home, Laura sat on the porch steps, rocking slightly, whispering her son's name like a prayer. Sophie pressed against her side, silent tears running down her face. Michael stood nearby, fists clenched at his sides, his jaw rigid. He needed to be strong for them, but the image of Ethan alone in the dark gnawed at him. Somewhere in the woods, Ethan stumbled, his small legs sinking deep in snowdrifts. His cheeks burned with cold, his breath short. "Daisy?" he called, his voice breaking. But the forest answered only with silence. The first night had begun, and with it, a battle against time. The sheriff gathered his deputies near the fire at base camp, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow. "We'll search in grids until sunrise," he ordered. "Every minute counts." Yet deep in his heart he knew the truth. A child lost in Maine's winter had only days, maybe hours, before the cold swallowed him whole. Before we go further into Ethan's fight for survival, and the remarkable K9 who would later follow his trail through snow and darkness, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories of courage and hope. The wind howled through the forest, carrying Ethan's fading cries into the night as the search began. Before he became the missing boy on every neighbor's lips, Ethan Miller was simply Ethan, an 8-year-old who loved to run, imagine, and chase after the one creature he trusted most, his golden retriever, Daisy. He lived with his family in a modest clapboard house at the edge of Millinocket, where the pines stood tall and the winters seemed endless. His days were filled with simple joys, building Lego towers with his sister Sophie, riding his bike in summer down the cracked asphalt road, sneaking cookies from the kitchen when his mother wasn't looking. But winter had always been his favorite. Snow meant freedom, snow forts, sledding, and Daisy bounding through the drifts like a lion in the wild. Ethan was curious, sometimes too much for his own good. Michael, his father, often said, "That boy's got adventure stitched into his bones." Laura, his mother, would shake her head. Adventure is fine in stories, not in the forest, not alone. Ethan listened, sometimes. Other times the pull of the woods was stronger than warnings. He had grown up with bedtime stories about explorers, men and women who pushed into wild places, with nothing but courage and will. To Ethan, those heroes didn't feel so far away. He liked to think he could be one of them, even if his expeditions were nothing more than wandering to the edge of the backyard and pretending the tree line was the mouth of some uncharted jungle. Daisy, the golden retriever, was his partner in every mission. Patient and loyal, she tolerated his endless chatter, his schemes to dig secret tunnels, and his habit of sharing half his peanut butter sandwiches with her. Where Ethan went, Daisy followed. To him, she wasn't just a pet. She was family, guardian, and fellow explorer rolled into one. On the day he vanished, Ethan had woken early, tugging on his parka with excitement. Snow had fallen through the night, fresh and powdery. From the window, the world looked untouched, sparkling in the pale morning light. "Come on, Daisy," he whispered, tugging her ear. "Let's go see what's out there." Sophie had teased him at breakfast, rolling her eyes. "You'll get lost one day chasing that dog." "Won't," Ethan shot back, his mouth full of cereal. "I know every tree." Laura laughed softly, brushing his hair back as he bolted for the door. "Every tree looks the same when you're cold, Ethan." Those words echoed in his mind hours later, when the forest no longer looked like his playground, but a maze of identical pines and endless white. Still, before the fear had crept in, before the cold sank too deep, Ethan's imagination had carried him. He pictured himself as a brave pioneer, leaving tracks in the snow for others to follow. He thought about what he'd tell Sophie if he found some secret clearing, or maybe even deer tracks worth showing off. He had no idea how quickly that bravado would unravel. For Ethan, the forest had always been a place of magic, not menace. He remembered afternoons in the fall, when Michael had taken him and Sophie hiking through Baxter State Park. His father had taught them how to follow trails, how to spot markers nailed high on trees. "The woods can be your friend," Michael had said, "but never forget, they can also swallow you whole if you're not careful." At 8, Ethan hadn't truly understood. He had laughed, tossing pine cones, Daisy bounding at his heels. Now, as dusk closed in, those words returned with a weight he hadn't felt before. He missed the warmth of the kitchen, the sound of Sophie humming while she did her homework, the way Laura always called them in for dinner as though nothing bad could ever happen between sunrise and sunset. Out here, stripped of those comforts, Ethan felt smaller than he ever had. He hugged Daisy's absence like a memory, whispering into the cold air as though she was still beside him. "We'll be okay, we always are." But even he could hear the tremor in his own voice. At first, Ethan thought he could retrace his steps. The snow behind him held the faint outline of his boots, pressed deep into the white. He turned back, relieved, ready to follow the trail home. But when he took only a few steps, the wind lifted, scattering powder over the path, blurring the impressions until they disappeared. He spun in a circle, heart pounding. Every tree looked the same, tall, dark pines stretching endlessly in every direction. "Daisy," he called, voice cracking. Only silence answered. He cupped his mittenless hands around his mouth, trying again. "Daisy!" His shout dissolved into the empty air. The sun dipped lower, a pale disk sinking behind the branches. The light dimmed quickly, shadows stretching across the snow like long, reaching fingers. The air grew colder, biting harder against his cheeks. Ethan tugged his parka zipper up to his chin, but the chill crept through anyway, sliding under the fabric. His stomach twisted with hunger. He remembered the bowl of soup his mother had left cooling on the counter, steam curling into the air as he dashed out the door. He wished he had stopped to eat it, wished he had listened when Sophie teased him about getting lost. The deeper he walked, the more the forest pressed in on him. Branches snapped overhead as a gust rattled the trees. Somewhere in the distance a sound echoed, low, drawn out like a wolf's howl. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He tried to tell himself it was just the wind, but fear rooted him in place. He thought of his father's words. "The woods can swallow you whole." At the time, it had sounded like a warning meant for grown-ups. Now it felt like a truth written across every tree. Ethan's imagination, once his shield, turned against him. He pictured the dark spaces between trees filled with eyes watching him. He thought of hunters' stories, of animals tracking footsteps in the snow. He clutched his arms around himself, whispering, "It's just a story, just a story." But the forest didn't care. The forest answered only with cold. He stumbled on a root hidden beneath the snow and fell forward, his knees hitting the frozen ground. The impact jolted through him, sharp and painful. For a moment, he stayed there, his face pressed into the icy crust, his tears mixing with the snow. "Mom!" The word came out small, broken. He wanted to be brave, to be the explorer he always imagined, but he was only a boy, shivering and lost in the dark. He forced himself up, brushing clumps of snow from his coat. His fingers ached, red and raw from the cold. He tried to curl them into fists, but they didn't obey as quickly as he wanted. The forest stretched silent around him. He chose a direction at random, his legs heavy, trudging through drifts that came up to his knees. He tried to picture the house, the porch light his father always left on, Sophie waving from the window. But the images slipped away, replaced by the endless march of trees. As the last light drained from the sky, Ethan's breath grew ragged. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It seeped into him, slowing him down. He thought of the warm kitchen, the smell of soup, the hum of his mother's voice. He tried to hold on to those thoughts, but fear gnawed at them, leaving only emptiness. Finally, he found a fallen tree, its trunk hollowed by rot. He crawled beneath it, curling into the small shelter, pulling his coat tighter. The ground was unforgiving, the air sharper than knives, but at least the log shielded him from the wind. His eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion. He whispered Daisy's name once more, clinging to the memory of her warmth beside him. The forest offered no reply. Only the cold, only the dark. Back at the Miller house, the night dragged on with no sign of Ethan. The living room lights blazed, though no one dared sit. Laura paced the floor, her hands trembling as she wrung a damp dish towel, the fabric twisting tighter and tighter until her knuckles whitened. "It's my fault," she whispered, for the 100th time, her voice raw. "I should have been watching him." Michael stood near the window, his eyes locked on the dark line of trees at the edge of the yard. His jaw was tight, but his voice steady, as if speaking too softly would break him. "Laura, stop. We'll find him." Her eyes darted toward him, red and glassy. "How can you say that?" "He's 8, Michael. He's out there with no gloves, no food, no—" Her voice cracked. "No mother to hold him when he's cold." Sophie sat curled on the couch, knees hugged to her chest. She had cried until no more tears would come. Now only silence remained, a weight heavier than sobs. "He followed Daisy," she said hoarsely. "I told him not to. I told him he'd get lost." Laura dropped onto the couch beside her, pulling Sophie close, rocking her gently. "This isn't your fault, do you hear me? You're not to blame." But the words rang hollow. Guilt clung to all of them, wrapping around the room like another layer of cold. At the sheriff's base camp, a few miles from the house, Sheriff Daniels stood with his deputies. Maps were spread across a folding table, marked with hastily drawn grids. Radios crackled, voices from the search parties reporting back. Nothing. No tracks, no sound, no trace of the boy or his dog. Daniels rubbed a gloved hand across his tired face. "Snow's covering faster than we can track," he muttered. "We're chasing shadows out there." Deputy Harris frowned. "You think he could have made it to the river?" Daniels shook his head grimly. "Not in this cold, not without gear. He's hunkered down somewhere. We just have to pray he stays put." Back at the house, Michael finally left the window and joined Laura at the couch. He crouched down, his hands gripping hers. "Listen to me. Ethan's strong. You know he is. Remember the camping trip last summer? He built his own fire pit out of rocks. He'll remember what we taught him." Laura's lips trembled. "He's not camping, Michael. He's alone." "It's dark. It's—" She broke off, pressing her fist to her mouth as though to keep the terror from spilling out. Sophie buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "What if he's scared?" she whispered. Michael closed his eyes, his chest tightening. Of course he's scared, he thought. The image of Ethan, small and shivering, clawed at him, but he forced himself to stay steady, because someone had to. "He knows we're looking," he said. "He knows we'll never stop." The door opened suddenly, cold rushing into the house as Sheriff Daniels stepped inside. He pulled off his hat, his face grave but calm. "We've searched the west grid. Nothing yet. We're moving east with more volunteers at first light." Laura stood, gripping his arm. "Sheriff, please. He's just a child. He can't survive out there much longer." Daniels looked her in the eyes. "Mrs. Miller, I won't lie, the cold makes this harder. But your boy has something most don't. He's got people who love him, people out there fighting through the snow for him. That matters." Michael rose, his voice firm. "I'm coming with you in the morning." Daniels hesitated, then nodded. "Dress warm. It'll be rough." As the sheriff left, the house fell quiet again. Laura sat back down, clutching Sophie. Michael stood at the window once more, staring at the dark horizon. Outside, the wind howled, carrying Ethan's name across the frozen trees, and in that silence the family waited, hearts breaking with every passing hour. Dawn broke grey and heavy, the sky blanketed in low clouds that promised more snow. At the sheriff's command post, a group of volunteers gathered, their breath puffing white into the air as they stamped their boots for warmth. Snowmobiles idled nearby, headlights cutting through the haze, while others carried lanterns, radios, and long poles to probe the drifts. Sheriff Daniels stood before them, his map spread across the hood of a patrol truck. "We'll divide into grids," he said firmly. "South sector takes the old logging trail. East team, you'll sweep toward the river. Anyone not on machines will cover foot trails near the ridge. Check under trees in hollows, any place a child could try to hide from the wind." Laura stood off to the side, wrapped in Michael's heavy coat. She wanted to join, to run into the forest and tear it apart until she found her son. But Daniels had been clear. Family needed to stay close to base in case Ethan was brought back quickly. Even so, she couldn't stand still. She wrung her hands as Sophie passed out thermoses of hot coffee to the volunteers, her small voice repeating, "Thank you. Thank you for helping." The men and women nodded, their faces lined with exhaustion but set with determination. This was their town, their boy too. Michael tightened his gloves, stepping forward. "I'm going with the west grid." Daniels gave him a long look before nodding. "Stay with Deputy Harris, don't wander. If you find anything at all, call it in." Michael swallowed hard, then shouldered his pack. He gave Laura one last glance, his eyes saying what words couldn't. "I have to try." The teams dispersed into the forest. Snow crunched under heavy boots, radios crackled, voices called Ethan's name over and over, echoing against the pines. The farther they walked, the more oppressive the silence seemed, broken only by the wind shaking ice from branches. Deputy Harris kept his group tight, leading with a lantern. Michael walked close behind, his eyes scanning the ground obsessively for prints. Once he thought he spotted small boot marks, but when he bent down, the trail dissolved under the drift. "Damn it," he muttered, his breath ragged. Harris placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Don't lose hope. Snow covers fast. He could be close and we wouldn't see tracks." Nearby, another team probed beneath a fallen log. A volunteer shook his head. Nothing, not even Daisy. The absence of the golden retriever weighed on everyone. Dogs were supposed to find their way home. If even Daisy hadn't returned, what chance did Ethan have? Still, no one gave up. Hour after hour, the forest filled with shouts. "Ethan! Ethan Miller, can you hear us?" Each unanswered call chipped at morale, but no one stopped. At base camp, Laura sat by the fire, clutching Sophie's hand so tightly it hurt. She listened to the radios, every burst of static making her flinch. "Why haven't they found him?" she whispered. Sophie pressed her face into her mother's sleeve, too tired to answer. By midday, exhaustion began to show. Volunteers stumbled back to camp for coffee, their faces red from windburn, their voices hoarse. Some argued quietly over strategy. "We should have started closer to the river," No, the ridge. Kids climb when they're scared. Daniel silenced them with a wave of his hand. We cover everything, no fighting. That boy needs us united. Laura rose, her voice sharp with desperation. He needs you faster. Silence fell. Even Daniels lowered his eyes, the truth hanging heavy. Time was their enemy. The search pressed on into the afternoon. Snow fell again, light but steady, erasing what little traces might have been left. For every mile covered, it felt as though the forest stretched 2 miles further. Michael trudged through the white void, his body aching, his mind racing with Ethan's smile, his laugh, the way he had looked when he ran after Daisy. He forced his legs forward. He couldn't stop. Not while his boy was out there waiting cold and alone. The search had only just begun, but already the forest seemed determined to keep its secret. The hollow log shielded Ethan from the worst of the wind, but it did nothing for the cold gnawing through his coat. He curled tighter, pulling his knees into his chest, trying to make himself small. His breath puffed out in thin clouds, each one hanging briefly before vanishing into the black air. His fingers burned, then went numb. He rubbed them together, but the friction barely sparked warmth. He thought of the gloves Laura always made him wear to school, how he'd grumble about them being too bulky. Now he would have given anything for them. The forest was alive with sounds. Branches creaked as if groaning under the weight of the snow. Somewhere far off an owl called, its low hoot echoing. Once, a branch snapped nearby, sharp as a gunshot, and Ethan's heart leapt. He pressed his face against his coat, holding his breath, listening hard. Nothing followed, only silence. He tried to distract himself by thinking of home. He imagined Sophie's teasing, the way she'd flick his ear when he annoyed her, pretending to be mad but never really angry. He thought of the warm glow of the kitchen light and the smell of soup simmering on the stove. His stomach clenched. Hunger was no longer a dull ache, it was sharp, twisting. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and now his body cried out for food. He scooped a little snow into his mouth, letting it melt on his tongue. It eased the dryness in his throat, but left his body colder than before. Tears threatened, but he bit them back. His father's voice rose in his memory. "Miller men don't quit, Ethan. We face what comes and push through it." At the time, Ethan had laughed, not taking it seriously. Tonight, the words clung to him like a lifeline. Still, fear crept in, insistent. What if they don't find me? What if I fall asleep and don't wake up? He buried his face into his knees, whispering into the darkness. "You'll find me. You have to." His mind wandered to Daisy. Had she gone home? Was she looking for him now? He pictured her golden fur, her nose pressed to the ground, tail wagging as she picked up his scent. The thought warmed him more than the coat did. "Find me, girl," he murmured, his voice shaky. "Please." Time moved strangely. Minutes stretched like hours, each one filled with cold that seeped deeper. His eyelids grew heavy, the temptation to let them close tugging at him. But he remembered hearing once that people who fell asleep in the cold didn't always wake up. The idea jolted him. He shook his head, forcing his eyes open. He decided to talk out loud just to keep himself awake. "When I get home, I'm eating 3 bowls of soup," he whispered, "and cookies, and hot chocolate." His voice cracked into a laugh, though it came out brittle and thin. "Sophie will probably steal the marshmallows again." A sudden gust rattled the trees, sending snow drifting down over his shelter. He flinched, then pulled his coat tighter, shivering hard. His body felt too small against the size of the forest, too fragile to endure what the night demanded. But he stayed awake, whispering stories to himself, clinging to the rhythm of words the way sailors might cling to rope in a storm. He imagined he was an explorer again, braving uncharted land, waiting for his rescue team to arrive. The thought gave him just enough courage to last through the worst hours. As dawn began to hint at the horizon, faint grey light touched the edges of the forest. Ethan's body was stiff, his eyes raw from fighting sleep. He had survived the first night, but the forest was not finished with him yet. By the time the sun rose on the second day, the town of Millinocket had transformed. What had started as a frantic search, led by deputies and neighbours, was now a collective mission pulling everyone together. At the firehouse, volunteers streamed in, stamping snow from their boots, signing their names, and collecting maps. The hum of radios filled the air alongside the steady pouring of coffee into tin mugs. At the church hall, women organized sandwiches, soup, and thermoses for searchers heading back into the woods. Children too young to join the hunt stood outside with handmade signs painted in bright colors. "Find Ethan." Sophie stood among them, her mittened hands red from the cold, passing out flyers with Ethan's photograph printed in black and white. "Have you seen my brother?" she asked anyone who passed. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to keep speaking. It was the only way she felt useful. Inside the house, Laura sat at the kitchen table surrounded by neighbors. Some offered quiet words, others busied themselves with folding blankets and packing extra clothes, in case Ethan was found that day. Yet Laura's hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup untouched. "What if he's too cold?" she whispered to no one in particular. "What if he gave up in the night?" One neighbor leaned over, her voice firm. "Don't think like that, Laura. He's a strong boy. Kids surprise us with how tough they can be." Michael came in briefly from the search, his face raw from windburn, his eyes red. He kissed Laura's forehead. "We're covering the ridge next. Still nothing, but we're not done, not by a long shot." Arguments did spark among the volunteers. Some insisted Ethan must have gone toward the river, others swore he would have headed uphill. "Kids climb when they're scared," one man argued. "They look for higher ground." "No," another countered. "They go downhill, toward water, toward open space." Sheriff Daniels silenced them. "We cover every direction," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "This isn't about who's right. It's about bringing that boy home." And so they pressed on. Groups moved deeper into the forest, leaving bright orange ribbons tied to trees to mark where they'd been. Each call of Ethan's name echoed with both hope and dread, each unanswered shout a stab to the heart. At the edge of the woods, Sophie stood watching. She wanted desperately to join, to comb every inch herself, but the sheriff had refused. "Too dangerous," he told her gently. "We need you here." She hated the words, but she obeyed. That night, as temperatures dropped again, the community gathered in the school gymnasium. The basketball hoops loomed above rows of cots where volunteers would rest between shifts. Laura and Michael stood before the crowd, holding Sophie's hands tightly. Michael's voice was low but steady as he spoke. "Ethan's out there, and I know he's fighting to come home. We can't let him fight alone. Every one of you out in the cold with us, you're giving him a chance, and my family will never forget it." Tears welled in Laura's eyes, but she nodded. "Please," she said, her voice cracking, "please keep going. Don't stop." Applause spread through the gym, quiet at first, then growing stronger. It wasn't joy, it was resolve, a collective vow. The forest was vast and merciless, but Millinocket was united. Every lantern lit, every boot print pressed into snow, every thermos of soup passed to a weary searcher was proof of a community refusing to surrender. And though night was falling again, heavier and colder than before, the people of Millinocket carried something stronger into the darkness: hope. The morning of the third day brought a new kind of tension. Volunteers were exhausted, their faces pale from sleepless nights and hours of trudging through snow. The sheriff knew morale was slipping, and Laura's hope was fraying thread by thread. Then, just after dawn, the sound of an approaching vehicle rumbled up the icy road. A state police SUV rolled into the makeshift base. Its doors opened, and out stepped Officer Sarah Collins. Her parka zipped to her chin, her expression sharp with focus. Beside her leapt a large German shepherd, his coat dark and sleek, eyes alert as they scanned the crowd. A murmur rippled through the volunteers. Everyone recognized a K9 when they saw one. Sheriff Daniels moved forward, relief breaking across his lined face. "Collins, glad they sent you." Sarah nodded, patting the dog's side. "This is Ranger. He's trained for search and rescue. If there's a scent left to find, he'll track it." Laura pushed forward, her eyes wide with desperate hope. "You mean he can find my boy, even after all this snow?" Sarah crouched slightly so she could meet Laura's gaze. Her voice was calm but steady. it'll be hard. Fresh snow masks trails, scatters scents. But dogs can pick up what we can't. He's our best shot. Laura covered her mouth, a sob escaping before she could stop it. Michael pulled her close, his own voice rough. Then let's get him started. Sarah asked for something of Ethan's. Sophie rushed back into the house and returned with her brother's wool hat, small and worn from winter play. She held it out carefully, as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. Ranger sniffed it deeply, his ears pricking, tail stiffening with focus. Sarah clipped his lead to her belt, her gloved hand steady. "All right, boy," she murmured. "Find Ethan." The crowd watched as Ranger lowered his nose to the snow, weaving slowly in widening circles. His breaths came sharp and deliberate, his body tense with purpose. Every eye followed him, each movement a thread of hope. Michael stepped closer to Daniels, whispering urgently, "Do you think it'll work?" The sheriff didn't look away from the dog. If anything can cut through this storm, it's him. Ranger paused suddenly, head jerking toward the east. He let out a low bark, pulling at the lead. Sarah's voice rose. "He's got something." A ripple of energy surged through the volunteers. People adjusted packs, checked radios, prepared to follow. Laura clasped Sophie's hand so tightly the girl winced. "He's alive," Laura whispered fiercely. "He has to be." Sarah moved with Ranger, letting him lead through the trees. The forest swallowed them quickly, the dog tugging insistently, nose pressed to the snow. Behind them, deputies and volunteers followed, their boots crunching in rhythm. Back at base, Laura remained frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the woods. "Please," she whispered into the wind, "please, God, let that dog find my son." Inside the forest, Ranger worked tirelessly. He ignored the cold, the drifting snow, the fatigue that slowed human legs. His world was scent, faint traces of Ethan's path, the lingering imprint of Daisy, the dog who had vanished with him. Ranger barked again, sharp and certain, pulling Sarah deeper into the trees. Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got a trail." For the first time since Ethan had gone missing, hope didn't feel like a fragile dream. It felt real, running strong and steady on four legs through the snow. As daylight drained from the sky, the forest grew colder, harsher. Ethan stirred beneath his fallen tree shelter, his body stiff and sore from the night before. His lips were cracked, his stomach hollow, and every breath stung his throat like ice. He forced himself to crawl out, snow crunching beneath his knees, and glanced around the endless white expanse. He whispered Daisy's name again, though his voice was weak. No bark answered him. Loneliness pressed heavier than the cold. He remembered something his teacher had once said during a field trip: "Your mind can be your strongest tool, or your worst enemy." Ethan clung to that now. His mind wanted to give up, to tell him he was too small, too weak, that no one could survive this long. But another part whispered that he had to keep moving, had to do something, or the cold would win. His legs trembled as he pushed through knee-high drifts. Each step drained him, but staying still felt worse. He followed the faint slope downhill, remembering his father's advice. Water means people. Rivers lead to towns. He didn't know if he was heading the right way, but it gave him purpose. The forest groaned as night fell. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries long and haunting. Ethan froze, panic surging in his chest. He wanted to run but forced himself to stay quiet, crouching low. His small breaths came quick, white fog spilling from his lips. When the sounds faded, he moved again, his heart still pounding. Hunger gnawed relentlessly. He thought about the chocolate chip cookies Laura kept in a tin, Sophie sneaking him two when their mom wasn't looking. The memory made his mouth water, but the craving only sharpened the ache in his belly. At one point, Ethan tripped over a root hidden under snow, landing hard on his side. Pain shot through his hip, tears springing instantly to his eyes. He lay there for a long moment, staring at the dark sky through a lattice of branches. "I can't," he whispered. His voice cracked, barely audible. "I can't do this." But then another memory surfaced, Michael kneeling beside him after a scraped knee last summer, saying, "You don't stop just because it hurts, Ethan. You stand back up. That's what makes you strong." Ethan groaned, forcing his numb arms to push, his legs to stumble back under him. Tears froze on his cheeks, but he kept going, one shaky step at a time. Eventually he found a hollow log, larger than the one from the night before. Crawling inside, he curled into a ball, hugging himself for warmth. The wood smelled damp and earthy, but it shielded him from the bitter wind. His eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion crashing over him like waves. Still, he fought to stay awake. He talked to himself, whispering promises. "You'll see Mom again. You'll see Sophie. They're looking for you right now." He pictured his mother's arms wrapping him in a blanket, Sophie's teasing grin, Michael's steady voice. At some point, though, his mind slipped into dreams. He saw Daisy bounding through the snow, tail wagging, her bark sharp and joyful. He chased after her, laughing, the cold gone, the forest bright. But when he reached out to grab her, she vanished into the mist. Ethan woke with a start, shivering violently. His body ached with cold deeper than before. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "Please, Daisy, bring them to me." Above him, the wind howled through the pines, carrying his faint words into the night. Somewhere not far away, Ranger pressed his nose deeper into the snow, following a trail only he could sense. Snow crunched beneath Ranger's paws as he pulled forward, nose low, tail stiff with focus. His world was scent, invisible threads woven through the snow, faint but undeniable. Each breath carried Ethan's essence, the wool hat Sophie had given as the sample, and Ranger locked on, driving forward with a determination that ignored fatigue, cold, or distance. Sarah jogged behind him, her breath misting in the frigid air, one hand steady on the lead. "Easy, Ranger, steady." Her voice was firm but encouraging, the cadence of years of training. She trusted him more than her own eyes. Where people doubted, Ranger knew. Deputy Harris followed close with Michael, both men keeping pace as best they could. Michael's face was drawn, his eyes burning with hope and fear in equal measure. "He's got something, doesn't he?" he asked breathlessly. Sarah nodded, never breaking stride. "He's working. This isn't random. He's on a line. If Ethan's out there, Ranger will find him." The forest grew denser, branches clawing at their coats as they pushed through. Snow fell in steady flurries, threatening to smother any trace of the boy's passage. But Ranger didn't hesitate. He pulled harder, letting out a short, urgent bark. "Mark it," Harris said quickly, tying a strip of orange ribbon to a branch. They were deep in now, far from the road, far from the comfort of base camp. Michael stumbled briefly in a drift, catching himself against a tree. "Ethan," he whispered, as though his son might hear him through the miles. He pushed on, driven by Ranger's certainty. Sarah kept her eyes sharp on the dog. "That's it, boy. Keep it up." Ranger's ears flicked, his head jerking side to side as the scent wavered. A gust of wind tore through the pines, scattering flakes. The dog froze for a moment, nose working furiously. Michael's heart slammed in his chest. "Don't lose it," he begged under his breath. "Please don't lose it." Sarah crouched quickly, her hand brushing Ranger's shoulder. "Find him," she whispered. "How you can do it?" Ranger let out a sharp bark, then surged forward again, pulling them east. Relief coursed through Sarah, though she didn't show it. Hope was fragile, and false trails were possible. But in her gut, she knew Ranger wasn't wrong. They crossed a frozen creek, their boots slipping on the icy surface. Michael glanced down, his breath catching. "Boot prints," he shouted. The faint outline of small boots pressed into the snow, half filled by drifts but unmistakable. Sarah knelt, studying them. "They're old, maybe from yesterday, but they're his." She looked up, her eyes fierce. "He's alive, he's moving." Michael's throat tightened. He touched the print with his gloved hand as though it were his son himself. "Hold on, buddy," he murmured. "We're coming." Ranger barked again, tugging the lead hard. He pulled them uphill now toward thicker woods. Sarah followed without hesitation. "He's close to sheltering. Kids look for cover." Hours stretched, every step aching, every breath burning. Yet hope surged stronger than fatigue. Volunteers trailed behind, marking trees, calling in coordinates over radios. Word spread quickly back to base. They've got a trail. The dog's leading them in. At the camp, Laura clutched Sophie as updates crackled through the speakers. Her tears spilled freely now, not of despair but of fragile, desperate hope. "They've found his prince," she whispered over and over. "They've found him." In the forest, Ranger lunged forward with renewed energy. His barks grew sharper, insistent. Sarah's pulse quickened. "He's telling us something," she said. "He's locked in now." Michael's eyes scanned the endless trees, the drifts of snow, searching for any glimpse of Red Parker. His heart hammered so loud, it drowned out the wind. "Ethan!" he cried, his voice raw. "Ethan!" But only Ranger answered, nose to the ground, pulling them deeper into the wilderness. The third morning came with a brittle silence. Ethan stirred weakly inside the hollow log where he had sheltered through the night. His body ached, as if he had been bruised everywhere, each muscle stiff, his fingers curled and unresponsive. He forced them open, wincing at the raw sting in his skin. His lips were cracked, his face windburned, but worse than pain was the deep, hollow exhaustion that seemed to swallow him whole. He tried to stand, but his legs trembled violently. For a moment he sank back down, dizzy, his vision blurred. "Get up," he whispered, though his voice was little more than a croak. "You have to." Memories flickered in his mind, faint and fragile. Michael's strong voice during their camping trip saying, "The woods respect those who don't give up." Sophie's laughter when she had dared him to climb higher in the oak tree, and his determination to prove her wrong. And Laura's gentle hands smoothing his hair, telling him he was braver than he thought. Those memories carried him forward. Slowly, painfully, he crawled from the log, his body quaking in the frigid air. He looked around, disoriented. The forest stretched the same in every direction, white and endless. His breath came shallow, his chest tight with the effort. Hunger clawed at him now, fiercer than before. His stomach cramped, forcing him to double over. He had eaten nothing for 2 days, only snow melted on his tongue. He looked around desperately, spotting a cluster of frozen berries clinging stubbornly to a bush. He plucked one, its skin shriveled, bitter against his tongue. It wasn't much, but it gave him the smallest thread of strength. The sky had turned grey again, heavy with more snow. Ethan trudged forward, each step an act of willpower. His boots felt heavier than stone, his parka stiff with frost. He stumbled often, catching himself against trees, muttering words his father had taught him. One step, then another. At midday, he found a small stream, its surface crusted with thin ice. Breaking it with his hand, he cupped the icy water to his lips. It was painfully cold, but it refreshed him. He stared into the stream for a moment, his reflection pale and hollow-eyed, barely recognizable. "Don't quit," he told the boy, staring back. "Don't you quit." As the day dragged on, the cold deepened. He sought shelter in a hollowed pine, its branches thick enough to block the wind. He pressed himself into the corner, shaking violently. He thought of home again, Laura's soup steaming on the stove, Sophie tossing a pillow at him when he stole the TV remote, Michael lifting him onto his shoulders at the fair. The images burned with longing. "I want to go home," he whispered, tears freezing on his lashes. "I just want to go home." The temptation to sleep pressed down heavily. Every time his eyes closed, warmth seemed to creep into his body, deceptive and dangerous. But he forced them open, slapping his legs, muttering aloud, "Not yet, not yet." In the distance, faintly, a sound drifted on the wind. A bark. Ethan's head jerked up, his heart slamming. "Daisy?" he croaked. He scrambled to his knees, listening hard, but the forest fell silent again. He sagged back, hope flickering, uncertain. Maybe it had only been the wind. Still he held on to that sound, real or imagined, as proof he wasn't alone. Proof someone, or something, was closer now. Night loomed again, and Ethan curled tight in the pine's embrace, whispering to himself like a prayer. "Hold on. Just hold on." Somewhere, not far behind, Ranger's barks pierced the forest, stronger this time, leading the rescuers ever closer. The search party had been moving for hours, each step slower than the last. Volunteers were exhausted, and the wind gnawed at their resolve. Michael stumbled through drifts, his body aching, his throat raw from shouting Ethan's name. Yet Ranger pulled harder than ever, his nose driving into the snow, his muscles taut with certainty. Sarah kept pace, her voice calm but urgent. "He's on something strong now. Stay with him. Don't break formation." Deputy Harris adjusted the radio on his shoulder, calling back to base. "Unit 4, we may have a lead. Dogs locked on East Ridge." "Stand by." Static crackled before Sheriff Daniels' voice broke through. "Copy that. Keep me updated. We're ready to move back up if you confirm." The group pressed deeper into the forest. Ranger barked sharply, tugging the lead toward a thick patch of pines. Sarah's pulse quickened. She recognized that bark, insistent, unwavering. It wasn't a false alarm. Michael surged forward, snow spraying under his boots. "Ethan!" His voice cracked, but this time he didn't care. "Ethan, it's Dad!" The only answer was the rush of wind. For a moment, dread clawed at him. But then Ranger lunged again, pulling them toward the base of a ridge. He circled furiously, nose pressing into the drifts, tail whipping side to side. Sarah crouched, studying the disturbed snow. Her breath caught. "Look here," she said, pointing. "Indentations, small ones. A kid could have been lying here." Michael dropped to his knees, brushing away powder with trembling hands. The shape was faint, but real, an impression of where a small body had pressed into the snow. His throat closed. He was here. The volunteers leaned in, their exhaustion forgotten. Harris's voice sharpened. "Radio this in. We've got a confirmed sight. He's moving east." Sarah tugged Ranger's harness. "Show us, boy. Don't stop now." Ranger whined, then pulled hard, breaking into a near run through the trees. The team stumbled after him, branches snapping back, snow whipping against their faces. Every heartbeat thudded with urgency. Michael called again, voice raw with desperation. "Ethan!" "Answer me, son." For a moment, silence. Then, faint, almost swallowed by the wind, came a weak cry. Michael froze, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Sarah stopped, straining her ears. Ranger barked wildly, pulling them forward. Another cry drifted through the trees, thin and broken, but real. "Ethan!" Michael roared, stumbling toward the sound. His legs burned, but adrenaline drove him on. The team broke through a thicket, snow scattering around them. Ranger lunged straight ahead, nose fixed, barking with a ferocity that echoed through the woods. Sarah's chest surged with relief. "He's close! He's right here!" Michael's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. He shouted again, his voice breaking. "Hold on, Ethan!" "We're coming!" Back at base, Laura clutched Sophie as the radio crackled. A deputy's voice burst through, breathless but triumphant. "We have contact! Repeat, we have contact!" Laura's knees buckled. Sophie caught her arm, both of them sobbing as Daniels shouted orders to ready medics. The gymnasium erupted in gasps, then cheers. In the forest, Ranger pulled to the mouth of a hollow log, barking furiously. Sarah knelt, peering inside. The darkness revealed only faint movement, but her heart leapt. She lowered her voice, gentle and steady. "Ethan, my name is Sarah. We're here to help you." A faint whimper drifted out, weak but alive. Michael fell to his knees, tears spilling hot despite the cold. "Buddy, it's me." "Dad's here." His voice shook, but it carried every ounce of love and strength. For the first time in 3 days, the forest seemed less cruel. The breakthrough had come. The boy was found. Michael pressed closer to the hollow log, his gloved hands shaking as he reached toward the opening. Inside he caught the faint glimmer of eyes, wide and frightened. Ethan's face was pale, his lips cracked, his breath shallow. For a moment father and son simply stared at each other, the silence broken only by the wild beating of Michael's heart. "Buddy," Michael whispered, his voice breaking, "it's me. Dad's here." A weak sound came from the log, barely audible. "Dad?" Tears blurred Michael's vision. "Yes, son. I'm right here." "You held on just like we knew you would." He extended his arms, coaxing gently. "Come out to me." Ethan stirred but couldn't move far. His body trembled violently, every effort draining him. Sarah moved beside Michael, her voice calm and measured. "Don't force him. He's hypothermic. We need to move slow. She reached into her pack, pulling out a foil thermal blanket. With steady hands, she opened it and leaned carefully toward the boy. Ethan, my name is Sarah. I've got something warm for you. We're here to take you home. Ranger barked once, then sat back, tail thumping as though to reassure the child. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the dog, faint recognition sparking in his expression. His lips moved. Daisy? Michael's heart clenched. He nodded quickly. Daisy's safe, son. Right now, Ranger's here to help us bring you back. With painstaking care, Sarah eased the blanket around Ethan, tucking it close. There we go, she said softly. You're safe now. We've got you. Michael leaned forward again, his voice raw with emotion. Come on, buddy, let me carry you. Ethan reached a trembling hand outward, his fingers cold and stiff. Michael grasped it gently, then slid his arms under his son, lifting him out of the hollow. The boy was frighteningly light, his body limp, but he pressed his face into his father's chest, a weak sob escaping. I knew you'd come, Ethan whispered. Michael's tears fell freely, his arms tightening around the boy. We'd never stop looking, not ever. Deputy Harris keyed his radio with urgency. We have the child, alive but cold. Requesting Medivac team now. Static burst, followed by Daniel's voice shaking with relief. Copy that. Get him out fast. Medics are standing by. The volunteers around them exhaled in unison, some wiping their eyes, others clapping each other on the back. The crushing weight of 3 days in the snow lifted in that instant, replaced with fierce determination to bring the boy safely home. Sarah walked beside Michael as they began the trek back, her hand steadying the thermal blanket around Ethan. Keep him awake, she instructed. Talk to him. Make sure he answers. Michael nodded, brushing a hand over his son's damp hair. Ethan, stay with me, okay? Tell me what you want when we get home. Ethan's eyelids fluttered, his voice faint. Soup, Mom's soup. Michael choked out a laugh, half sob, half joy. Then soup it is, and cookies, as many as you want. Ranger trotted ahead, barking occasionally, as though guiding them out of the woods. Sarah gave him a small smile. Good work, boy. You did it. As they neared the edge of the forest, the distant sound of cheering carried on the wind. Volunteers at base camp had heard the news. The town that had spent 3 sleepless nights in fear now waited in triumph and relief. Michael tightened his hold on Ethan, whispering fiercely, Almost home, buddy. Just a little longer. The forest, which had felt like a cage of ice and shadows, now seemed to part around them, making way for the boy who had fought, and the father who had never given up. The ambulance lights painted streaks of red and blue across the snow as the rescuers emerged from the forest. Michael carried Ethan wrapped tightly in the thermal blanket, his arms trembling with exhaustion and relief. The crowd at base camp erupted in cheers and sobs, the sound echoing through the cold night like a hymn of victory. Laura broke free from the cluster of neighbors and ran forward, her legs barely touching the ground. Ethan! Her voice cracked as she reached them, her hands flying to her son's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she kissed his frozen skin. My baby. My sweet boy. Ethan stirred, opening his eyes weakly. Mom? His voice was faint, but it carried enough strength to break her completely. I'm here, Laura whispered, clutching him as if she'd never let go. You're safe now. You're safe. Sophie pressed in close, her mittened hand slipping into Ethan's. You scared me half to death, she said through sobs, half scolding, half laughing. Don't ever do that again. Ethan gave a tired smile. I missed you. The medics quickly moved in, checking his pulse, wrapping him in heated blankets and slipping an oxygen mask over his face. Severe hypothermia, one said briskly. Frostbite on the fingers and toes. We need him at the hospital immediately. Michael kissed his son's forehead before handing him over, his eyes never leaving the boy. We'll be right behind you, he promised. The ambulance sped off, siren wailing. The family followed close in a deputy's vehicle, their hands clasped tightly together, as if afraid the moment would dissolve if they let go. At the hospital in Bangor, doctors and nurses worked swiftly. Warm IV fluids, careful rewarming of Ethan's body, monitoring for shock. Hours passed like minutes, the family pacing in the waiting room, hearts pounding with every creak of the door. Finally, a doctor emerged, pulling off his mask. "He's stable," he said, his voice steady. "The frostbite is mild. He'll recover with time and care." "He's a tough little guy." Laura collapsed into Michael's arms, sobbing with relief. Sophie wiped her eyes roughly, muttering, "Told you he's stubborn." When they were finally allowed into the room, Ethan was propped up in bed, pale but smiling faintly, his hands wrapped in gauze. Daisy was there too, brought in by neighbors, her tail wagging furiously as she jumped onto the bed. Ethan buried his face in her fur, tears streaming silently. "You came back," he whispered. Michael ruffled his hair, his own eyes damp. "We all did. We'd never leave you out there." The news spread quickly through Millinocket. Church bells rang, neighbors left casseroles on the Miller porch, and banners appeared with Ethan's name painted in bright letters. The whole town celebrated as though one of their own had been brought back from the brink. At the next Sunday service, Pastor Green spoke from the pulpit, his voice ringing with emotion. "This community proved that when we stand together, no storm, no darkness, no wilderness can defeat us." Sarah and Ranger were honored at the town hall days later. Ranger sat proudly at Sarah's side, tail wagging as Ethan, now stronger, knelt to hug the dog tightly. "Thank you for finding me," he whispered into Ranger's fur. Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening. "He's the hero, not me. He never gave up on you." The applause that filled the hall was deafening, but Ethan only heard the steady thump of Ranger's tail, a sound he would carry in his heart forever. For the Miller family, home had never felt warmer. The fire crackled, the smell of soup filled the air, and laughter returned to the walls. The ordeal was behind them, but the lesson would remain. Love, faith, and the strength of community had carried them through. Weeks passed before Ethan's strength fully returned. His fingers healed, the frostbite leaving only faint marks, and the color came back to his cheeks. The first night he slept in his own bed again, Daisy curled at his feet. Laura sat by the door, just watching him breathe, as though afraid he might vanish if she blinked. Michael checked the locks twice, then whispered to his wife, "He's safe. Really safe." But the experience had changed them all. Ethan no longer bounded into the woods without thinking. He still loved adventure, still carried the spark of curiosity, but it was tempered now with caution and respect. One evening, sitting by the fireplace with Sophie, he said quietly, "I thought about what Dad said, that the woods can swallow you whole. I didn't understand before, now I do." Sophie nudged his shoulder, her voice soft. "You scared me. I didn't know if I'd see you again." Ethan gave a small smile. "I didn't know either, but I kept thinking about you and Mom and Dad. That's what kept me moving." Laura overheard, her heart swelling with both pain and pride. She knelt beside him, smoothing his hair like she had done since he was a baby. "You're braver than you know, Ethan. But remember, bravery doesn't mean going alone. It means knowing when to stay close, when to ask for help." The community's bond deepened as well. Volunteers who had once been neighbors in passing were now lifelong friends. The church continued hosting gatherings where stories of the search were retold, each person recalling the moment hope had returned with Ranger's bark. At the town hall, a ceremony was held. Sheriff Daniels spoke first, his gravelly voice filled with emotion. This boy survived 3 nights in the cold because he refused to give up, and because this town refused to let him be lost. He gestured to Sarah and Ranger, who stood beside the family. And because a dog trusted his nose and never quit. The crowd erupted in applause as Ethan stepped forward, still shy but steady. He hugged Ranger tightly, whispering, "You're my hero." Ranger licked his cheek, tail thumping the floor, drawing laughter from everyone. Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his own voice breaking. "We almost lost him, but we gained something too. We learned what it means to fight together, to hold on when hope feels thin, and we'll carry that lesson always." Years later, Ethan would remember that winter as the moment his life changed course. He grew into a young man determined to give back, joining search and rescue as a volunteer. On cold nights, trudging through the snow with other rescuers, he would think of Ranger, of Sarah's steady voice, of his father's arms carrying him out of the woods, and he would press forward, knowing what was at stake for every family waiting at home. But for now he was simply a boy safe in his mother's arms, a sister by his side, and a father watching proudly. Daisy lay at his feet, and Ranger dozed nearby, his job done. The house smelled of soup and bread, warmth radiating against the winter beyond the windows. Ethan leaned into Laura and whispered, "I'm never going that far again." She kissed the top of his head, tears glistening. "Good. Because I don't think my heart could take it twice." And in that moment, the Miller family understood what survival truly meant, not just enduring the cold and the dark, but holding fast to love, to hope, and to the ties that carried them home. If Ethan's story of courage and the devotion of a K9 dog touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories. And if you want to continue this journey of hope and resilience, click the video on your screen now. You won't want to miss it.